Okay. Shalom, everyone. Today is May 14th, and we are here at Eidos for our second of our Great Jewish Letters Rav Kook edition class. We are going to, we are going to do a fascinating letter today. It's actually a very long letter. We're only going to do a small part of the letter. It's letter number 44. What you have in front of you is a letter, a section of a letter from a correspondent of Rav Kook, which led Rav Kook to write letter number 44. It wasn't called letter number 44 back then. It was just a letter to this Rabbi Alexandrov, but it became letter 44 in the collected letters of Rav Kook that we talked about last time. Let's start with some background to this letter, which you don't have in the packet in front of you. We'll talk about the addressee's letter and some other elements of the letter that we are not going to discuss, but just to get a sense of what's going on. So the letter was written to Rabbi Shmuel Alexandrov. Rabbi Alexandrov fit into the categories of correspondence that we talked about last week. Like, he's not exactly a student of Rav Kook. He's not a community leader. He's not a community rabbi. He's a guy. He's a man, a contemporary of Rav Kook. Actually, was born the same year as Rav Kook in 1865. As far as we know, he was murdered by the Nazis in 1941 when they arrived in his town, Babruisk. That was again in 1941. He has a very interesting educational background. He was educated in a classic Haredi education. He studied in the Volozhin Yeshiva. Rav Kook also studied in that famous Volozhin Yeshiva. But he also saw himself sort of as an educated and enlightened individual who tried somehow to find some synthesis between aspects of his personality, between his classic yeshiva background and his affinity for other subjects. You could argue that he was trying to do what modern Orthodox people try to do, right? Try to somehow find the balance between these two things. He also was a Zionist and participated in the first Mizrahi conference. He was also connected, studied classical Western philosophy of Kant, which becomes apparent in part of the letter, and he also was familiar with Hasidic and specifically Chabad teachings. So this is sort of paints the picture of a complex individual who is not easy to pigeonhole or put into a particular camp, and in that sense, he is actually similar to Rav Kook, because Rav Kook was also an eclectic person, full of internal contradictions, and also very hard to to put in a particular box. So Rav Alexandrov and Rav Kook were on some level kindred spirits. Now, their correspondence began in 1902 when Rav Kook was still in Europe, and continued for about 10 years after that. Rav Alexandrov asked Rav Kook to help him clarify certain philosophical issues in Jewish thought. Only a few of Rav Kook's letters to Rabbi Alexandrov have been preserved. Rav Kook's son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, and we studied some of his son's introduction to the letters last week. He notes in that introduction that many of Rav Kook's earliest letters have been lost. Remember, we said at some point Rav Kook started to use carbon paper, right? When he would reply to people's letters, he would write the letter with carbon paper, so he would keep a copy of his correspondence to them. But before that, he was writing to Rav Alexandrov, and some of those were lost. Rav Alexandrov also published some of his letters to Rav Kook in a collection called Michtevei Mechkar Uvikoret, in which some of the views of Rav Kook are also apparent. This letter that letter number 44, is written from Rav Kook in 1907. By that time, Rav Kook was already in Eretz Yisrael, and he was the chief rabbi of Yafo and the surrounding communities, where he encountered all sorts of communal and educational challenges that any community rabbi would, and some which were specific to the new yeshuv, right, to the new settlement in Eretz Yisrael. The immediate question that Rav Kook and Rav Alexandrov were corresponding about was how religious Judaism could practically address the spiritual and educational challenges it faced. Things like enlightenment, heresy, and new educational methods. They both believed that a new educational approach for the religious Jew was necessary. They didn't necessarily agree on what exactly that approach should be. In other letters and other writings, Rav Kook wrote about a whole new type of yeshiva with a different yeshiva curriculum that include Jewish thought and philosophy and history side by side with the traditional yeshiva curriculum. Even though Rav Kook actually wrote about that and started a yeshiva, that yeshiva still exists. It's called Merkaz Rav Kook. It's in Yerushalayim. That yeshiva never really adopted Rav Kook's new. That's just a side issue. So now we're going to jump right into the letter with that background about who the letter is written to, and now we're going to see why Rav Kook started to address socialism. So let's jump to the letter, which you now have on page 1 of your packet, and I'm going to open the other light so Paul doesn't have to sit in the dark.
There you go.
Okay. He or. Okay. So Rabbi Shmuel Alexandrov, in this letter, discussing with Rav Kook the challenges of modernity, raises the question about socialism and liberalism. On one hand, though, we could see those things as opposite, right? Socialism is about the collective and about living for the larger group and banding together with your fellow workers for your own good. And liberalism is very much about individualism and being able to make decisions which are good for you and not necessarily completely in line with the collective. So on some level, these things are opposites, but Rav Kook is going to deal with them conceptually as one challenge. And I think what I'd like to ask you to think about as we're reading this letter is to consider if Rav Kook's approach could be applied to other, let's say, developments of modernity. So as I was reading this, I was thinking about like feminism, for example, right? Where you have lots of sort of typical writings by rabbis who are opposed to feminism and feel that it doesn't stem from a place that I guess we will call l'shem shamayim, right? It doesn't stem from a place that is for the sake of heaven. It has some ulterior motive, or any other ism or any other movement you can think about. Consider whether or not what Rav Kook is saying here could apply to those questions beyond what he's directly responding to. And one other point before we go is while we're learning this letter, we are also going to be relying heavily on the footnotes of Rabbi Tamir Granot. We talked about him last week. I put the footnotes in because the letter sometimes requires some help. And I found that the footnotes from Rabbi Granot, as he annotated this letter, are very, very helpful. Okay, so with that, let's jump in. Would anyone care to read Rabbi Shmuel Alexandrov's letter or part of that letter to Rav Kook? That's on top of page 1. Who would like to read? Vakasha.
I hope he was working.
He was not.
It is completely impossible to unify the essence of Judaism with the essence of historical materialism because they were opposites. And virtually all adherents of Marxism never returned to Judaism. If we can find within Judaism a position that kills historical materialism, we would truly be able to take pride in our treasures.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. Alexandrov takes no prisoners, right? His view of how would you frame his view on Marxism, socialism? How would you view it from what he said?
Historical materialism. By the way, they would totally disagree with that. Marxists would totally hate that characterization.
Fair enough. But what's Alexandrov's position of this?
That they're self-interested, only caring about the things they can get. Right? And it's part of a historical trend.
Right, and what he writes is it's completely antithetical to Judaism. Right, it's completely antithetical to the notion that everything stems from some sort of class struggle. I think that's what they're talking about here. They talk about historical materialism, and that the way towards achieving the common good is to, again, for the workers to band together against the owners, right? And to have this class struggle and to overcome, sometimes even through violence, right? That's the only way to achieve the society that we're seeking. That is against Judaism. His proof is that the Marxists never returned, the Jewish Marxists never returned to Judaism. And what does he want to do? He wants to find something in Judaism to kill it, right? To kill the whole idea. I'm not sure exactly what type of economic philosophy Shmuel Alexandrov is in favor of, but it's clearly not the socialism or the Marxism that he is describing here. Let's just read one more. Just read the next paragraph.
Universal justice. This term relates to Rav Kook's essay, Thoughts in Ipnei HaShon, is the essence of Judaism and all of the various types of liberalism which are rooted in love and sensitivity. Their blessed source is in classical Judaism, making it easy for us to be true to the fundamentals of Judaism while being the most extreme liberal.
So he likes liberalism, right? He feels that liberalism is very much in line with the Torah because he feels that liberalism is seeking universal justice. And that is the essence of Judaism. And there's an element of classical Judaism in liberalism, even though it may not appear obvious, and even though the people who call themselves liberals, who are trying to spread liberalist thought, are not necessarily adhering to Jewish law and Jewish communal norms. So he, right, Rabbi Alexandrov, has a distinctly different outlook. Liberalism. Right? Yeah.
One quick comment.
Yeah.
The key word in historical materialism is materialism. That's the essence of the Marxist point of view. They are dealing with materialism, nothing spiritual whatsoever.
Excellent. Good. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay,
We will note that.
Alexandrov did not live in the United States, particularly from the 60s on, when love and sensitivity opened up a can of worms.
He did not. Correct. All right. Now, let's look at Rav Kook's response. Okay. Rav Kook's response is fascinating. We're going to look at, one second, a few paragraphs from this letter. Then we're going to look at another passage from Rav Kook's writing to help us unpack a little bit of what's going on in the letter. But yeah, go ahead.
If he lived potentially in areas that were built by Russia, and the Russian Revolution happened business before the Russian Revolution.
So this letter we said was 1907.
So
So before, but there's
There's
stuff,
thoughts.
right, exactly. Okay. So letter number 44. Says Rav Kook, our great inner strength, when it awakens and becomes clear, will fear no heresy or despair. So the heresy here he's talking about could be what was just mentioned, that the socialism that was prevalent was godless, right? It was very clear that religion is the opiate of the masses, right? And that it was sold by the owners, right, to keep down the workers. So there's that heresy, but there's also just plain old heresy, right? Atheism and heresy. But Rav Kook, listen to this: will fear no heresy. So we have to understand why that's the case. It efficiently takes from everything its best content. Now that sentence really sums up very much what we are going to be talking about tonight. Meaning our great inner strength efficiently takes from everything its best content. This is not because this best content is completely new to it, but rather because all good and all truth is already rooted in the nation of Israel. This is the immortality and everlasting life planted within us by the Torah of truth. So all good ideas, all ways in which the world is going to be perfected are already rooted in the nation of Israel. And there are things out there which are elements of that good, which are elements of the good and the truth. They're out there, but they're not clear, and maybe their source is suspect. But what we believe we can do is efficiently take from everything its best content. Now, again, why can we take the best content from everything? Because it's already ours. Like it's innate within us, and have to discover it within ourselves and in the external world. Now, this next paragraph, I think, is the key. It's quite long, so let's keep our fingers between this page and the next page because we're going to use the footnotes a lot. Who would like to read paragraph on page 1 where it says, "We do not grieve"? Any takers? Thanks. Fallon told you.
We do not grieve if some characteristic of social justice is constructed without limit.
Again, this notion socialism was atheist, anti-religious. Doesn't bother us, he says.
Because we know that the aspiration for justice, whatever form it is itself the most illuminating divine.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second. And anyone want to in their own words offer an explanation of this fascinating statement? Because we know that the aspiration for justice, whatever form it may take, is itself the most illuminating divine emanation. What does that mean? Explain.
The essence of Judaism is intertwined with a recognition of justice and comes from us, but also that we should not care whether someone mentions God or not. And we know that within ourselves that it comes from God.
Right. So this is very important. This notion that Rav Kook is suggesting, if you look out in the world and you see a group of people aspiring for justice, it's not only good because it adheres to notions like tzedek dov, but it's divine. Now, the people who are preaching it don't know it's divine and probably don't believe in the divine. But we need to be spiritually broad enough to recognize the holiness in things that at first glance don't seem holy because of the people who are championing those causes, right? So this is really like a very metaphysical, spiritual approach and assuming, right, or attaching divine importance to things that our people doing that are not only, again, seem not religious, but seem anti-religious. And says Rav Kook, no, don't let that fool you. All right, keep going.
If mankind were to desire the establishment of a state of equilibrium and serenity for the heart, devoid of any spiritual influence, we would nevertheless find there, even if mankind were unwilling to recognize it, the essence of this justice fixed by consensus. And if only mankind could succeed, greatest spiritual.
So it sounds like there's thought, right, already in the air of creating this, what does he call it? A state of equilibrium in life, right? But it's devoid of spiritual influence. Again, it should not scare us. Let's look at footnote 13. Rav Granot is very helpful. This is on page 13. Susie, you want to read the page 3, number 13 on top? Sorry about that.
In other words, even if the social movements have no spiritual pretensions and only seek a life of order and harmony, of inner and social balance, the divine aspect is noticeable within them. Okay, indeed, a world that is inundated in chaos and disharmony is in opposition to its divine character. Man striving to attain equilibrium in his life also stems from the recognition of the basic organic unity of existence, even if it is not at all portrayed as a religious sentiment. The ramifications of the striving for unity, specifically on the material and practical planes, is paradoxically an extreme manifestation of the totality of divine unity.
I think the key to what he's saying is in that first sentence, right? Even if social movements have no spiritual pretensions and only seek a life of order and harmony, of inner and social balance, the divine aspect is noticeable. What's the divine aspect? This is actually a theory that Rabbi Yitzchak Greenberg also writes about in his book, and that is the world moves from disorder to order. You see that most in the Genesis story, right? There's tohu vavohu, there's a complete disorder, and then God slowly over the 6 days of creation starts to put things in order and create an order. And his argument is that that's the way the world moves, and that's what Rav Kook is also saying. And therefore, if you have a social movement that's trying to create, to remove the chaos of life and create order and serenity and peace in life, that's divine. That's something that's divine.
If God is so great as he is, has the capability to make everything perfect, or to, lack of better words,
Better, yeah.
why does he leave it like this so that people have, I understand there is some involvement that we have to make the world a better place. I get that. But it just seems like he doesn't have to leave it like this either.
Well, Rav Kook does not address that. That's true. He doesn't address that. He just recognizes that as a reality.
It almost seems like it makes it sound like God didn't leave the world in a perfect way. I would quicker believe that God did create it in a perfect way. We screwed it up and we're trying to fix it up.
Well, I'm not sure, because at the beginning of the Torah, God says, Peru uruvu umulua ta'aretz v'kivshuha.
Right.
So God's saying, I created the world, and now what happens in it is largely up to
Every
you.
action, right? Let's say we build a building or a birth happens.
Right.
That is with the action of God being part of it. So God is or anything that happens, good or bad, has God's actions in it. So my point is, it's really us that are influencing in the negative or positive as well. But real truth is God himself isn't creating the negative or the badness or leaving it void.
God left the world.
He left it void. He just wants us to better it.
He left the space for us,
Right.
which means Boreas Kol.
Yeah.
Right, so
everything, including the possibility of evil, because it gives us free choice. I think if.
I think the
let's-
point
But he
is-
didn't create that.
Yeah, so I want to get back to the letter, but
Back to
I
Rabbi
want to get back to the letter, but I think the point is
Yeah.
to your point, Shlomo, that at some point God sort of said, okay, I'm trusting you, humanity, with the world, and now it's up to you. I created the world, and now that command, Peru, Uruvu, Mulut, Archvik, Shua, all those things, that's how Rabbi Soloveitchik understands it, is our charge to run the world. Otherwise, had God perfected the world, then there would be nothing for us to do. We were angels.
I
Okay,
just have one
so-
quick comment.
let's go a little further before we offer more comments. Okay, so now we're back in the actual text, back on page 1. But he shall say, I am, this is in the middle of that paragraph, right after where it says 13, but he shall say, I am no prophet, I am a tiller of the ground, for a man taught me to keep cattle from my youth. Should a man want to build a completely structured cosmology without the aid of any spiritual emanation, by the calculation of material necessities, we may watch this child's game in perfect ease, since it builds a shell of life without knowing how to build life itself. Whereas we draw close and are strengthened more by this bond of the inner light and holiness. And Lord, your God, have brought you out of Levity. So let's look at this footnote, number 14, because it really teaches this quote from the Navi Zechariah. Rav Kook apparently interprets this verse positively as a prophecy of comfort that states that specifically the turn to simple human ideals, not to clearly spiritual life, is itself the perfection and unity of life. Again, because it includes in it this divine spark of how God wanted the world to operate. And in footnote 15, Rabbi Granot, this Rav Kook is referring here to Marxist historiosophy, where Alexander saw Marxism as the great enemy of Judaism, both because of its content and because of the dramatic influence that it had on Jewish youth in Russia, right? Its atheist content, and that it caused many people, drew many people away from Judaism at the beginning of the 20th century, in the years preceding the Bolshevik Revolution. Materialism is the attempt to understand history and ontology together. It sees all processes as data reducible to material causes. So that we saw already, right? We saw that Rabbi Alexandra was a staunch opponent of socialism because of these two things. And Rav Kook is saying, well, it's not as bad as you think it is, because it includes this this divine spark. Okay, yeah.
I'm struck by the optimism and the openness of Rav Kook, and with the lack of judgment that it means for, and to be open to non-Jewish peoples having connection with the divine spark, even if they don't have religion,
Right.
if they do it the right way. So it's interestingly positive
Yeah.
and interestingly open-minded. Not that he would say it afterwards, right? But he's talking about the opportunity, if you will, in this thought. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yes. I mean, Rav Kook is I wouldn't call it, like, he's not completely positive. He sees he's troubled by the atheism, or although we're gonna see something about Rav Kook's view on atheism a little bit later. Of course, he's troubled by that. And in last week's letter, he wrote some harsh things, right, about people who are not who have heretical ideas. But here he's suggesting that despite that, this heretical idea, these heretics are doing something which externally serve the goals of the Torah, right? And since it serves the goals of the Torah, Rav Kook can't help but seeing some sort of divinity. Right? Rav Kook is a mystic. He lives with God in a very real way, and so he sees God acting in the world in a way that maybe others are not willing to see, and that leads him. And this frustrated a lot of his colleagues, because what they saw were atheists, Jews who left Judaism, Jews who were building kibbutzim and societies which had thrown away all measure of Jewish tradition in a Marxist way, in building a Marxist society. So on the outside, that's all terrible, and that's what they see. But Rav Kook says, no, we have to realize that there's divinity in what they're doing. And now our job is to try to bring back the understanding that this really all stems from a divine place. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. You say you see divinity in this. What I would emphasize is that he realizes that all people have a neshama. Everyone has a spark of Hashem in him or her. And when they do certain things, they're following their neshama, whether they're Jewish or not. And this inspires him because he sees the divine presence in what they're doing in these regards, even though, to use a Kabbalistic term, there's klipa around it, but don't worry so much about the klipa. Worry about the essence.
The essence, right?
And
Right.
so
Okay.
he can deal with these
Yeah.
things very positively, and he has to because he's in Israel. He has a very complex society, and he has great confidence in what is going on, even though it strikes other people as very anti.
So that's a good point. Last week we also mentioned that Rav Kook had a very interesting view toward the individual chalutzim, who again were not observant and who had left, normative Jewish practice. But since they were so concerned, they were willing to give their life for the land of Israel, the people of Israel, and the language of Israel, right? Remember I showed you last week that he called them tzadikim gimurim, these completely irreligious young men and women building the land of Israel. He called them perfectly righteous people because they were lending themselves to an important goal. So I think it's clear that Rav Kook's outlook in Israel, Rav Kook's outlook is heavily influenced by what he's seeing happening in Israel. I'm not sure if Rav Kook would say the same thing about atheist Marxists in Poland, right? But because these people are doing what they're doing in the land of Israel, and part of building their perfect society is also building the land of Israel, I don't think you could decouple those things. That seems to me to be moving Rav Kook. Let's look at a few more sentences in this paragraph before we move on to two more brief topics. He says, if you look after 18 on page 2 on top, with this we go out to the wide world and free it from the bonds of its enslavement from the deathly sleep, right? That deathly sleep could be referring to the atheism of what they're engaged in. It inflicted upon itself and all creation. And then we proclaim, Lord God, behold, you have made the heaven and earth by your great power and outstretched arm, and there is nothing too difficult for you. You show loyal love to thousands and recompense the iniquity of the fathers to the bosom of the children after them. O great and might Lord, the Lord of hosts is his name, etc., etc. And if you look in footnote number 20, he's quoting here a pasuk from Yirmiyahu. He's emphasizing here God's presence in history. Again, even though most of us don't see it, Rav Kook says, I see it. And I see God's presence. I see God's presence in history. So this is quite radical, I think, in the sense that Rav Kook is able to see in the atheist, Marxists, anti-religious, maybe something positive, which just needs to be redirected. And there were later on sort of political parties in Israel that sort of leaned socialist, but they were religious. They were religious parties who leaned socialist. So they had, because there is a notion of religious socialism. Right? There's something called Christian socialism, where they're not suggesting that it's all a materialist struggle, nor are they saying that religion is bad. They're saying that the ideals of socialism match the ideals of our religious beliefs, and we're going to work because we believe in God. We believe that's what God wants. We're going to work to build a structure like that, not because we're in a constant class struggle, but because this is what God wants. Okay, so that's where Rav Kook is getting at. Okay, let's just do two brief things. I mentioned, so what we're seeing here is Rav Kook's ability to see good where we would argue that traditionally we may see something which is not good. Let's talk. I want to read a paragraph from this book which I mentioned last week, Mark Shapiro's book on renewing the old and sanctifying the new, which deals with a lot of Rav Kook's newer writings that I said were found over the last 20 years or so, and published over the last 20 years ago. So before we read Rav Kook, let me ask you a question. Give me a sentence or two on the positive value of atheism from a Jewish perspective. Strange question, maybe. Okay. Right. You could
give you two.
Right. But we're seeing Rav Kook here. We're seeing also something opposite of Judaism, right? Materialist socialism, atheist materialist socialism. Rav Kook is also finding something good in there. So, give me two sentences. Quick, yeah, two sentences.
Very simple. There are people who make a decision, and there are people who don't make a decision. Religious people have made a decision. Atheists have made a decision, meaning they've looked at the world and made sense of it in religious terms or atheistic terms. The people in the middle who haven't made any decision are, in a sense, nowhere.
Okay, but I'm not sure if that's if Rav Kook would look at that as a positive element, something that could build Judaism. So now it seems like they made the decision not to believe, and now they're out. Anyone else want to give it a shot? The question is a sentence or two on how maybe Rav Kook or you could spin atheism in a positive way.
He says in the beginning here that that a movement that is not necessarily agenda driven or this God or that, so is, but for social justice, for the aspiration of justice, and people can gather together around that and emanate from that truth can make the world a better place. That's
right, but that's not specifically about atheism. That must be about atheists who are doing social good. But let's leave just the atheism itself. So let me read to you.
Let's better understand atheism.
Someone who denies the existence of God.
So, according to what we know, right? About Yeshua,
right,
and everything else, if we define everything against everything we have, there would be no purpose for the Jewish people.
Okay.
Or
right.
I believe. I mean, because our whole religion is based on serving
God. 100%. That's this week's parsha. We have the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, of sanctifying God's name, and the Sefer HaChinuch says the only purpose we're here is to serve God. Okay, let's read. I'll just read you a couple of paragraphs from this book, Renewing the Old and Sanctifying the New, and the chapter is called The Problem of Heresy. So a whole chapter related to heresy. Atheism is heresy, right? Okay, here we go. For Rav Kook, atheism also has theological value and comes from, quote unquote, holy source, which is what he says about, right? He says the same thing about the socialism. It comes from a holy source. They and a lot of other people haven't figured that out, but it comes from a holy source. And he writes this in Orot, which is one of the most well-known books of Rav Kook's spiritual musings. It's sometimes brief, sometimes not so brief paragraphs. So why is it holy? Because it washes away false and simplistic ideas about God, a cleansing that is vital if Judaism is to thrive in the new era. So atheists on their way to completely not believing in God ask some good questions, right? And so Rav Kook says what the atheists do is they force us to seriously think about God and seriously think about theology and not to have simplistic answers to hard questions. Now, Rav Kook doesn't like where the atheists have landed, and he believes those questions can be answered in ways that don't lead to atheism. But there's something holy about it. What's that?
They're being asked.
Right. And if you're not an atheist or at least an agnostic or some sort of spiritual troublemaker, right, you're not going to ask the question. Because of this, he can state explicitly that atheism has temporary legitimacy. That he writes also in Orot, and claim it is to be found precisely among, listen to this, those souls imprinted with a higher vision. Sounds very similar to what he said about the socialists. Right? They have this higher vision. They're just missing the part about God. So the same thing with the atheists. They have a higher vision. What are they trying? They're trying to pinpoint the truth about the world, which for Rav Kook is the truth about God. So on their way, they're doing something important. Instead of being taught a sophisticated religiosity, these people were offered mediocrity, which they understandably rejected, leaving them without any belief. Elsewhere, he acknowledges that it was precisely the moral failings among the religious that helped give rise to atheism. That's a whole other argument, right? That Rav Kook writes elsewhere explicitly that atheism has nothing to do with belief. It has to do with the way people act. And if people who are religious act poorly, badly, then people will reject Judaism. So Rav Kook is going on two parallel tracks. One track is
It's as if you don't believe in God.
no, meaning I see a religious Jew acting in a bad way. I'm like, well, if that's religion, I'm rejecting it. Right? It's not they didn't enter into some deep philosophical problem about whether God exists. Bad things happen to good people, or your question, why did God leave the world in such an imperfect state? They didn't have those questions. They were just happy to be Jewish. And then they see Jews acting in a negative way. They're like, no, I'm out. It can't be something divine. It can't be something special. Right. Another way in which he sees denial of God's existence as having a positive aspect is that atheism can be regarded as a preparation for the higher religious plane, where the existence of God is not something that one needs to think about, as one's life will be enmeshed in the light of God. So similar to what he does with socialism, he does with atheism as well, which one could argue is a more radical thing to do. Okay, one other point. On page 5, we noted that says in the letter, in the early part of the letter, that all good and all truth is already rooted in the nation of Israel. That's a very, very full statement. He could be echoing what he wrote in Orot on page 5, the second paragraph. The multiplicity of different characteristics which are distributed among many nations are included together in Israel. So you have liberalism, Marxism, all the isms. They're all in us, including capitalism, right? Including we encompass a multitude of characteristics, some of which are actually contradictory with each other, are like the national soul. He fixed the boundaries of nations in relation to Israel's numbers. Consequently, they are more prone to internal divisions and dissent, given that there is no lack of various tendencies and capabilities. If you want to understand, Rav Kook is giving us a theory on Jewish dysfunction. Why are Jews constantly arguing with each other and fighting with each other? Because within our national soul, and this is a little bit of my understanding or focus, we have it all, but my soul may lean more towards socialism, and your soul may lean more toward capitalism. So we're fighting with each other. You fully believe in your view. I fully believe in my view. They're all part of sort of the Jewish national soul, a city in which there is everything. Its priests come from within, its prophets come from within, its noblemen come from within, its kings from within, as it says, out of them comes the cornerstone, out of them comes the stake. The Torah as a whole, which incorporates through the power of the essence of its capacity and through the value of its lifestyle, the entirety of everything with all of its ideals, is a shield against divisions. It creates divisions, but can also be a shield against divisions. My problem with this is that you could argue that what he's saying is, well, then the Torah could just defend anything. And if the Torah includes every different characteristic, every different ism, then how am I supposed to say what's right and what's wrong? Can one say the Torah, because he suggests? Okay.
Right?
Yeah, great.
So your socialism, my capitalism, even though they might be different ways to get there, they're two essences that create the greater.
Right. So the hope would be to are you suggesting the hope is to try to find some way to merge or okay, it could be. What I'm suggesting is
I don't think one goes against next just because I believe one thing you believe.
So it could be right. Rav Kook,
right.
Rav Kook is probably saying if you feel that there is a division, you're not looking hard enough. Right? You have to do what Shlomo's saying. You have to work hard to find a way to heal those divisions, right? Through it, the greater good appears through all of the varieties of opinions and models. In many spiritual material matters.
He's saying it's a shield against division.
Right, because I think he's saying what you have to do.
Yeah.
He's saying we have to do what you said we have to do. It unifies them all through the universality of existence, except for those truly wicked people who uproot the house of Israel and brazenly throw off its highest. So, remember we just said all those positive things about the atheists and the heretics? Well, that's a bridge too far. Right, so we see Rav Kook's full of his contradictions. As Brewer said to the heretic, rejoice, O barren woman, who has not given birth to children like you. Okay. The multiplicity of forces is good for the nation when they are unified at the source of its existence, the Torah. And Rav Granot, in his notes on this, says following: the fundamental, you don't have this, the fundamental feature of the Jewish people had negative manifestations of excessive factionalism and internal disputes so characteristic of our national history and which caused the nation terrible damage at critical juncture of its history. The emergence of the sects during the Second Temple era and zealous factionalism are also an expression of the fact that the Jewish people contain the roots of qualities and values that are diametrically opposed to each other. Negative disputes stem from the appearance of these various elements while emphasizing their opposition to each other, exactly as Shlomo said, without recognizing that they are different expressions of the general unified element that is the true character of the nation. And then he says, Rabbi Granot says, just as sort of anecdotal evidence to Rav Kook is writing, I found this to be so fascinating. He says, the jarring fact that nearly every ideological movement in the world, especially beginning of the 20th century, counted Jews amongst its leaders or most prominent activists is a pathological symptom of the essential principle. Pathological because these Jews took part in partial idealistic trends that were specifically alien to Judaism, and sometimes even attempted to import them into Judaism in their stunted form that lacked malchut. We don't have to get into what the malchut is, but he says the fact that the Jews were the forefront of all these isms at the end of the 20th century is his anecdotal evidence that it's part of our sort of national DNA anyway. And that's what Rav Kook is saying about socialism. It's also part of our national DNA. We have to inject spirituality into it. but it's not foreign. It's not foreign to us, and it could, in fact, does have sort of a divine spark. So I started out by asking you, as you were reading this, as we're studying this, to think if this approach of Rav Kook is applicable to other isms. And I was thinking about feminism because that's sort of the ism that has been, I guess, front and center of my sort of adult life, especially within Orthodoxy and within Halakha. And it seems to me that Rav Kook would also say that that we should not say what other rabbis said, that the whole thing is driven by ulterior motives and it's not driven by a real desire for spirituality. It's driven by some element of truth, and we should embrace it. And just like every ism, we should embrace what's wonderful and good about them, and try to direct them in the path of Torah in ways that may not be at that point. So I find that this letter, even written in 1907, speaks very loudly today in terms of how we view ideological opponents, political opponents, religious opponents, right? That Rav Kook is asking us to enlarge our soul, to be more in line with the Jewish national soul, which includes all these multitudes. And if we do that, we'll spend less time sort of judging and more time embracing and celebrating what's good and positive in things that are, maybe even different to our own personal practices and beliefs. So that is part of letter number 44 from Rav Kook. Fascinating. If you want the whole letter, let me know. I'll gladly send it to you. It's available in English. We are not studying next week because it is the Hillel dinner next week, which is the 21st. We'll take a break and we'll be back together on the 28th. Until then, everyone have a wonderful evening and a rest of your day.